Hey guys, this is Mike Burrows from StanceWorks, and this is going to be our Fusion 360 CAD 101 lesson for today. I'm hopeful that you guys like this, and hopefully it kind of shows you some of the basics. I'm no pro at Fusion 360 or CAD at all. I'm just a hobbyist, but I'm hopeful that what I know will at least get you guys far enough along to make some progress. And we're using Fusion 360 because it's free for hobbyists to use, and it's incredibly powerful. You can do just about anything in this software once you learn how to communicate with it, so to speak. Today I've decided that we're going to make a wheel spacer, in part because it's really simple to do. It's got a handful of different processes that we're going to kind of experience and different tools that we're going to learn. And it's something that everybody should be loosely familiar with. If you don't have some, you've probably at least seen photos of one or are understanding of what it's meant to do. There's no moving parts. It's a very simple part and piece. So we're going to draw it up, and I'm going to show you guys how to make this. And if you guys like this episode, I'll come out with another one, and we'll make something a little bit more complicated and learn a few more tools. So now that you guys see the finished part that we're going to go for, I'm going to hop over to a new window. This is Fusion 360 as it comes and opens up, totally blank. And to quickly kind of explain what we have here, what you see on your screen, I'm presuming that you guys know nothing about this, is the way that the software works is based on this concept of sketches. You draw everything in 2 dimensions, and then you kind of extrude it into a 3rd dimension. And if that doesn't make sense yet, we'll get there. We're going to start, I'll explain these tools a bit more as we kind of move along. We're going to start with this first button on the top left that says Create Sketch. That's the first place to start every time. And when you click it, you're going to get your origin point. This center point right here represents 0, 0, and 0, your origin point on a 3-dimensional grid. It's your home base, so to speak. We're going to select the ground plane to work on. This is, if you can imagine, a flat tabletop. And we're going to come over here to the top right. We've got a cube that represents our view. If you kind of touch and drag on this, you can see how it affects the camera movement. We're going to just click the top face of that cube, and that means we're going to be looking down directly at our work surface. Now that we're creating a sketch, if you look over here on the left-hand side, we've got a few different tools, and we've got kind of our browser tree. And the first thing to discuss is the units of measurement. You can work in units of inches, feet, millimeters, centimeters, all that kind of stuff. We're going to be working in millimeters for the time being. You can work in both simultaneously. It doesn't lock you into anything. But what you see as default measurements will be whatever you pick as your document settings. So to begin with, if we're going to be making a wheel spacer, we know that a wheel spacer is a round object. So we're going to draw a circle. We're going to click our circle tool up here at the top. If yours is not there, you can go to the Create button and find it here under Circle. And we're going to go to Center Diameter Circle, which means we're going to start in the center and draw out by defining the diameter. The other tools are in here are just other ways to draw circles. A 2-point circle would be basically the overall diameter, like across the circle. 3-point would be defining a circle that needs to meet 3 different places. Tangents would be lines, so on and so forth. You'll have to brush up on your geometry if you want to learn how all of this stuff works if you don't remember it. We're just going to use center diameter circle. It's the most common way to draw a circle. And we're going to start at our origin point by clicking there. And if we just move the mouse outwards, we can see it will draw a circle of any size. And that highlighted box there kind of in the middle of the screen shows what size it's going to be. In this case, I'm going to use inches for our first setting because I don't natively work in the metric system, even though I prefer it. So I'm going to go with 6.25, and then I'm going to type inches. And that's going to give us a 6.25 inch circle, which is 158.75 millimeters. So we have the outside diameter of our spacer drawn up. The next thing we need to do is do a center bore, and then we need to define the lug pattern. Now, for defining lug pattern, we have a lot of common measurements: 4 by 100, 5 by 120, 5 by 114.3, etc. And if you don't know how a bolt pattern measurement works, that means in our case 5 by 120 is 5 lugs on a 120 millimeter diameter circle. So to draw that, we're going to draw a 120 millimeter diameter circle. We're going to go to our center point, and then I'm going to type out 120 for our millimeters, and we will click the button. Boom, we now have a 120 millimeter circle. Next, we have our center bore, and the center bore on a BMW is 72.56 millimeters. We're going to go with 72.6 to make it easy. Type that in, click the button. Now I've got some concentric circles, and these are kind of the core dimensions of the wheel spacer. Now we need to add our lug holes. I'm going to choose on the axis for no other reason than to make this easy for myself. I know that this point right here is 120 millimeters or 60 millimeters from the center, the radius. It's on my 120 millimeter bolt circle. And a lug bolt on BMWs is 12 millimeters. So we're going to put a 12 millimeter hole in this, and there we have a circle. So we've got one lug hole. Now, how do we make sure we have 5 that are equidistantly spaced correctly around our lug circle, our 120 millimeter ring? Well, we're going to go to the circular pattern tool under the create button. And this tool is really helpful. It does a whole lot of things. You can pattern out wheels and bolt circles, all sorts of stuff. We're going to just start by where it says objects. That's asking us what do we want to pattern. So in this case, it's our lug hole. The center point means where do we want it to rotate around. Any of these rings would get us where we want to be, but to make it simple, I'm just going to click the center of our ring. And then it's going to default to 3. That would be 3 lugs. In this case, if you did 4, that would be 4 by 120. Doesn't actually exist as far as I know, but you get the idea. You can put in 5. If you wanted to make it an 8 lug, you put in 8. We're going to stick with 5. That's a 5 by 120 bolt pattern. And if we click OK, now we get the proper ring. Now, the way that Fusion 360 works, it's important to kind of understand how to talk to the software and what the software wants you to tell it. Getting to a certain point with it can take a little bit of practice because it's almost like learning the computer's language. What we have here is a series of rings that we want to turn into physical metal parts. So if I click the Finish Sketch button, that's telling the computer, hey, I'm done drawing, now I want to make something out of what we have. So I'm going to come over here, and under the Create tab, this is where we make new shapes. We tell it, hey, I'm going to make something out of my drawing. The Modify tab is telling us, hey, I want to change a part that's there or kind of modify facets of it. On the Create tab, the most important one is the Extrude tool. This is pretty much how everything in this piece of software is made. We're going to click that. And the way that this works is now we can click shapes that we have made. Anything that is highlighted blue is a shape that we have kind of fulfilled into being able to be extruded. And it's only going to select contiguous shapes. Even though these are all connected, you have to select them all yourself. Now, there's a couple different ways to do this. For the first part of this example, I'm going to select everything because I want to show you how to use a few different tools. Let's say we want our spacer to be 15 millimeters thick. I'm going to type in 15 millimeters, and it's going to give us a 15 millimeter thick circle. If I hold Shift and the middle mouse button, I can now pan the camera, and we have a 15 millimeter thick, 6¼ inch diameter metal slug. Metal in our opinion anyways, doesn't actually exist. The sketch has turned off. We need to come over to our tree on the left-hand side and turn our sketch back on. You'll have to do that pretty regularly. The software likes to turn it off. I'm also going to come back to the top view and square us back up. And now what we want to do is remove the center bore and the lug holes. So we're going to go to the Extrude tool again, and we're going to select those holes. Now, sometimes the computer gets a little bit confused about whether you're trying to select the part or the holes. In this case, I'm just going to come back over here to the tree on the left-hand side, and I'm going to disable the body that we just made. The body means the part. We can name this part while we're at it, or here in a moment. I'm going to turn it off so that we can see underneath it. And we're going to select our holes. And if we turn our part back on, our selection will remain. And of course, we are still underneath the part with our drawing because we pulled this part upwards into three-dimensional space. Now, if we pull another part into this part, it will actually do an inverted operation. It will cut. So we can see some holes here, and as far as we draw it, it will basically cut that operation through the part. And you could say, if you don't want to cut it, you can come over to the operation over here and say, nope, I want it to be part of this. I want to make some pegs that come up from the back. You could do that. There's a whole bunch of different ways to use this tool. We're going to start with cut. And then the other thing that we want is we want to select our center bore. I'm going to swing underneath the part and grab the drawing there. And now we are telling it, hey, cut this out of the part that we just made. And so now we've got what is it, honestly, a very rudimentary wheel spacer. This would work. Now, there's a few different ways to do what we just did, and I'm sure that several of you out there are wondering, whoa, we just jumped ahead and started doing complex stuff and are cutting parts and pieces out of this. And so I'm going to take a couple steps back, and this is before we actually extruded our part. I hit undo 3 times. This is just our sketch again. You don't have to cut those parts out. You could just not select them. You could just bring this up and type in 15 millimeters and get the same result. However, I want to show you guys how the cut tool works. You can also extrude things separately in different operations. Anything that is its own segment, you can select it. We could select the insides of these guys. If we were making something with some keyways, who knows, and bring those up. It's important to start playing with sketches and understand how the extrude tool begins to interact with itself and other parts that you create. We're going to do a few more exercises here. Don't worry. I know that we're kind of flying ahead, but I'm going to show you guys how this begins to affect the part. So with our basic spacer made, I'm going to create a new sketch, and I'm going to click our home base again. You can click in other places too. If I were to click on the top of the spacer here, it will create a new plane for the sketch. Before we were on the bottom, now it will create a plane on the top. It doesn't really matter. You'll understand how to use that as you start kind of working in multiple dimensions and working on different things. You're always going to be sketching new things, and you're going to be sketching tools, so to speak, in order to cut and carve and make your parts and pieces the way that you need to. You'll wind up with a lot of sketches. So, with that drawn, I'm going to click the top button again. I'm going to come back up here, and I'm going to draw another circle. So we already know we have our 72.6 millimeter circle for the center bore, and this is what would need to fit inside of the wheel. So we need some material there to actually have a hub. So I'm going to pick 66 millimeters. It's not based on anything, just gives us something there. And we're going to finish that sketch. And now I'm going to come back over to the extrude tool. We're going to click that ring of our drawing. And now we're going to draw our hub bore. I'm going to pick 5 millimeters. That seems pretty reasonable. Now, if we come over here to our extrude tool, another interesting tool that we have here is this says direction one side, and that's for our drawing. I'm going to disable our spacer again so you guys can see what I'm talking about, and hopefully you guys can understand what we're looking at as I pan this back up and forth, up and down. If we go to 2 sides, it means that we can work on both sides of our drawing. So I could extend this side up some, and I could extend the bottom side down into the part. If I bring our part back up, you can see there. If you kind of glimpse inside there, you can see we're bringing the flange inside, which is something that we need to do. It needs to come in. If our spacer's 15 millimeters thick, I'm going to say 15 times 0.5, so it goes to the halfway point. If I hit enter, now we have a flange that operates as a wheel hub. So the wheel would sit here. This outside diameter is 72.6 millimeters, and the inside diameter of the wheel spacer is 72.6 millimeters for it to sit on a wheel hub. Now, if you want to, you can actually modify things that you have done. This is what's really powerful about the sketch tool, is if we come in here to our first sketch, we turn our sketches back on, I can go to Edit Sketch, and let's say I've decided that I want 14 millimeter lug holes, and I want a, ooh, I'm making some extra numbers here, 14 millimeter lug holes, and I want a 50 millimeter center bore. If I finish that sketch, it will adjust everything automatically. Now this part got confused because we did it on a separate layer. This will be where it becomes valuable to do as many things on a single sketch layer as you can. But you can modify things. We could modify the outside diameter and make it 8 inches. Well, that's 8 millimeters. If we go to 8 inches and then finish the sketch, it will automatically change what we have done. Don't actually need to do that though. So with the kind of cut operations, we're going to do a little bit of stuff on the back. I'll show you guys how that works, something that wasn't kind of in the intro. But before we get there, I want to show you guys how to use some of these other tools, because this wouldn't be a truly finished part yet. On machined aluminum parts, hard interior angles like this tend to be very serious crack points, and we don't want that. So we're going to come up here to our fillet tool, and a fillet is basically a kind of a rolled radius cut on corners. We're going to select the fillet tool and select, for now, this outside ring, and let's see what happens if we do a 0.5 millimeter. Maybe that's a little small. Let's do a 1 millimeter fillet. And if we zoom in, you guys can see it has now put a rolled edge. We can actually come down here to the bottom timeline and hit Edit Feature if we want. And over here where I put 1 millimeter, we could do 3 millimeters, and you can see it change as we work. There's 2 millimeters. There's 1.55555 millimeters. We're going to stick with 1, but I wanted to show you guys how that works. And you can actually modify any step that you have made past or present in your timeline down at the bottom. For example, this, when we extruded our part for the spacer, if I go to Edit Feature, we made it 15 millimeters thick. Let's say, I'm having some second thoughts. I want it to be 20 millimeters thick. It will do that, and it will correct everything else for us. With that fillet done, we're going to add another one to the inside edge here. You can add them both at the same time. It does not affect anything. You can select as many edges as you'd like. But that one is an important one to do. Another cool tool that every beginner absolutely loves is the chamfer tool. It's going to be under the Modify and on the chamfer button. And this is just going to cut an angle into the part. Let's say we're going to need to kind of soften this edge a bit. What does a 0.5 millimeter chamfer look like? Maybe a 1 millimeter. 1 millimeter might be a little bit big for real life, but it'll look good. And so now we've got kind of a nice finished edge. And let's chamfer the edge of our part here. That's definitely too big. Let's do a 0.5 millimeter chamfer. And then last but not least, we're going to chamfer our back edge so that it would fit nicely onto a car. With that, that is a loosely finished part. That would get us to the finish line, so to speak. But I want to show you guys how to use some other tools and how the sketch tools work. So we're going to go to the back of our part here. Again, to move it around, I'm just holding the shift button and moving my middle mouse button, or holding the middle mouse button, moving my mouse wheel. And from the bottom, I'm going to go to the sketch tool. I'm going to create a sketch, and I'm going to click the bottom of our part. And this means now I'm drawing with relation and respect to the bottom of the spacer. So let's say we want to cut some nicely shaped pockets in the backside of our spacer to lighten it up. There's a ton of different ways to do this, and the way that I'm going to do this right now is admittedly going to be very clunky, but again, I want to show you guys rudimentary ways to get to a finished point. So this is how we're going to do it. because I like everything to be very symmetric and equidistant, we're going to start with the line tool, and I'm going to pick a line from our center point out to 60 millimeters, which would be in line with our 120 millimeter PCD. Be the correct radius to the center of our mark there. Now I'm going to come around and I'm going to go to mirror. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to tell the computer, hey, this straight line that I've just done, I'm not going to draw anything with it. I'm not going to extrude from it. Over here on the line type, if I click construction, it will change it to a dotted line, which tells the computer, hey, this is just for reference. I'm just drawing with this. Now I'm going to come over to the circular pattern. Center point, again, will be in the middle. And I'm going to pick, instead of 5, I'm going to pick 15. And that's to give me a number that is going to give me spokes equidistant between our holes. Looking at 15, those center ones are not quite what I'm imagining, so I'm actually going to go up to, if I click 30, now we have lots of lines to work with, and we're only going to work in one segment. Again, this is pretty clunky, but this is how you can get equidistant marks between your part. I'm going to pick 2-point circle, and I'm going to start here and come over to the next mark, and then I'm going to do the same thing over here. And if we pick, let's see, let's do a slot. Let's do a 3-point arc slot, and if I pick from the center of our 2 points through the center of the other one, now we can make a nice big pocket there. Now what I want to do is I'm going to go to the circular pattern one more time, and I'm going to select the lines that we just made. Actually, I'm going to show you guys a cooler way to do this. Instead of mirroring the drawing, we can say finish this sketch, and we're going to extrude this part. Select all of our stuff. I'm going to move the camera so we can see here. And we're going to come down. We know our part is 15 millimeters thick, so let's say we're just going to go in 5 millimeters. And now we've got a pocket. That would work, right? Now what's really cool is we can come over to create and pattern, circular pattern, and we can actually do the features that we just did instead of the drawing itself. And if we do 5, we know that will space them correctly. And now we've got some lightened pockets into the back of the pad. And if you missed how I cut it in, instead of going up, I'm going to back up a little bit. With the Extrude tool, instead of dragging upwards to add material, we're going to drag downwards into the part 5 millimeters to cut that hole into it. And if you go through the part, you're just going to get holes. You can make a hole all the way through it. There are plenty of spacers that are like this as well. But for the sake of ours, we're just going to do a 5 millimeter deep pocket. You can come over here and type -5 millimeters and get the appropriate pocket. I'm going to put our features back into the part one more time. We're going to do axis in the center and 5 of them, and there you have it. Last, I think we need to do a fillet on the inside edge of these. We're going to select our lines, and we're just going to do a 0.5 millimeter. Let's do a 1 millimeter fillet. And there you have it. Now you have a spacer with some lightened pockets in the back. And presumably, yours came out just like this one. Should look pretty good at this point. That is a finished part, a finished piece. You've got a proper center bore inside. I'm going to turn off the sketches over here so we can just see it without any interruptions. And it's come out looking really nice. We could definitely use this. You could do all sorts of other things if you want to kind of mess with the tools. The chamfer tool is always fun. You could add a chamfer here. And you can go crazy with it. You can really add, some big cuts. Chamfers always look neat. For fun, we can chamfer the back of these perimeters. Oh, wrong button. And if we just drag the mouse, it will do all of them for us. So, you could have a pretty big chamfer on there before you start interfering with anything. Some people dig the way that looks. You could just do a 0.5 millimeter simple chamfer on them. And, you know, another example would be if this were the lug seat of a wheel instead of a wheel spacer, we could select our holes and use the chamfering tool to put an angle on them. So we can come over here to where we have distance and angle. We can change it to a 60-degree tapered seat and then drag it to the appropriate size, which would then allow them to fit a lug bolt. I don't know whether it's 60 or 30 on this end. Not hugely important. But there you guys have it. That is the 101 on how to make a wheel spacer. I hope that that was followable. I hope that you were able to make this part without too much confusion. Please let me know in the comments if you have any questions about how I did any of this stuff. I'll be happy to answer them and try to walk you through it. And we'll be back in the next episode, and I'll show you guys how to use these tools in more complex ways. And we might try to get to some sheet metal parts so you can start using these parts without any complicated tools to make parts of your own. Thank you guys for watching. I hope that this was helpful. I will catch you guys in the next episode.